my God, ladies and gentlemen, they actually pulled it off. They actually made it good. They made it great. The Last of Us on HBO is actually perfection. Let's talk about that right now. Making this up, guys. The Last of Us is a show I was actually somewhat worried about, predominantly for a couple of reasons. One, Neil Druckmann was actually a pretty big factor in my fear at the beginning of hearing this information. I do think that Druckmann is a fantastic writer and a fantastic creative, but he's a little bit too self-indulgent and he's a little bit too high on his own supply, especially if you'd followed a lot of his talks leading up to The Last of Us Part 2, and of course, justification for certain story elements in just The Last of Us Part 2. That didn't necessarily bother me as a fan, but I can see why they really ruffled a lot of people the wrong way. And people who don't know anything about that, yeah, you're in for, I should say the backlash to what could potentially be season 2 is going to be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. If it does go down that path, let's say 2024, 2025, who knows when the show's going to come out. But anyway, let's talk about what we do have here, which is as good of a pilot episode as you could possibly hope in regards to getting this story off the ground. Not only establishing the characters, establishing the history, establishing the danger, and establishing the absolute bleakness of the world and all that is contained within. I have to say, there were some alterations to what happened in the original game, like for how things kicked off, but they were minor. And what I think they actually added to it only made it better. They were able to like extrapolate the opening of that game in a way that really allowed you to feel for how it ended. And we all know, again, that gut-wrenching moment we were all dreading. And for me, and I talk about this frequently, like when I first played The Last of Us, I had first seen it at E3 2013. I went on the very last day of E3 and I got to see the presentation for the game with the actors and Neil Druckmann. I got to check it out at E3. I went home. I was flat broke, but I had a couple bucks. So I rented it on Redbox and my girlfriend and I sat there and we played it the next week when it came out. And that opening scene in the game when Joel and Sarah and Tommy are on the run trying to figure out what's going on, and Sarah just gets killed, was gut-wrenching back in 2013. Made only worse during the remaster when it came out in 2014. I haven't played the whatever it is that they just dropped because I don't have a PS5, but it's very like, and now here it is 9 years later, almost 10 years later, actually, and I've got two kids, two daughters. So for me, like, I was really kind of dreading that scene, and yeah, it hit hard, man. Like, my kids weren't home when I watched it. I would have probably hugged them. I would have watched it like after they weren't around. It's definitely not for kids, but it was freaky. It was intense. They really brought a lot of that to this particular story, especially with how they did the lead up to the breakout of the cordyceps virus. What I really enjoyed actually was the ABC presentation all the way back from 1968, what let us off. And what was great about that was that whole explanation for a fungal outbreak, us not being prepared for it, obviously leading into like the discussion from 68 was clearly something that was going to give some people some similarity, some formality in regards to like COVID or the pandemic. And then them talking about how, no, like, the virus or a bacteria that can be dealt with. But when we're talking about a fungus here, we can't even compete with that. And then I've seen a bunch of articles pop up today in the aftermath talking about that too, saying very similarly the same thing of, we can't really touch upon that right now. Like we kind of screwed. Like there might be some problems. Like I saw one article, this is true. One article headline that said, having gotten COVID actually like lowers your immunity to a fungal outbreak. I'm like, really? Today of all days, you're going to be dropping a headline like that? Didn't we already just get through the last 3 years where everyone is like vaxxed or double vaxxed, and some people are still now wearing masks because there's still fear of stuff coming back and whatever. And it's like, I want to be safe, but man, let me have my weird mystery disease fungus gaming porn on HBO and not actually make it relate to things that we've all lived through for the last couple of years. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And the show very much kind of like set the stage for that. What I thought was really cool as well was we got to see that there's a little bit of an addition to the creatures, to the infected, and they have these little like tentacles out of their mouth. I thought, well, that was really cool. That was a nice little addition. And the scene when Sarah walks into the neighbor's house and sees like the one guy bitten, and he's like, I've been bitten, and then the other woman's like being chewed up by the old lady and whatnot. That was pretty freaky. And then of course the one neighbor comes running out. I think her name was Denise, and Joel's like, get back in the house and lock the door. And then you just see like the other two come out and attack her as she tries to see if they're okay. And it's like, exactly. My whole thought process watching that scene play out the way that it did was like, this feels like it was heavily inspired by Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Now I know that the way that they played it was very much 1-to-1 to the game. I mean, a couple little alterations here and there. Like at one point, Tommy says like, hey, that's Johnny's place. But in the game, like, hey, that's Lewis's farm. So it's like, there's a little bit of a difference on that one. But really when they get into it, when they start really getting into the nitty gritty of it, oh my God, it just like so good. So good. The one thing I noticed that was pretty funny was like in video games, they have a way of arbitrarily splitting the player from the other NPCs, right? Something happens. There's an obstacle. It blocks the path and they can't move past that. In this particular case that happened, it made it look realistic. Like when Tommy's truck gets destroyed by a police cruiser and it blocks the pathway and Tommy has to get out on his own and everything else, like that happened in the game. But here they made it feel like, okay, it's happening, but it feels relatively realistic. You know, it's one of those particular things. However, the scene when they come across the soldier and the soldier has been ordered to kill them, like it is, you know what's coming. It's intense. You know how it's going to be, and it doesn't make it any easier knowing the outcome. In fact, the little girl playing Sarah did a great job. Pedro Pascal as Joel did a great job. And it was just holy crap. And then, of course, we get the intro sequence, which is very Game of Thrones, but still maintaining like the music from the game, which, I mean, if they would have altered the music, I would have rioted. You know what I mean? Like they did such a great job with that. I love that completely. Then, you know, we get into Boston 20 years later. There's that little boy as he's walking. You don't know if he's infected. You don't know if he's okay. He gets in there and then they test him and you see that he tests negative. And then they euthanize the kid. I was not expecting the euthanization of a child. And then, of course, showing his body being burned later on was just like even worse. What's worse about it is like they euthanized him, you know, and then like they still put a bag over his head and they still bound him. And that to me was nuts. Like that's how we get introduced to Boston, like the death of a kid. You know, you're like, okay, shit's getting real here. You know, and Craig Mazin, the guy behind Chernobyl, doing it like that definitely was like, yeah, okay. Like you could see him and Neil Druckmann are like very simpatico on how they wanted to handle the bleakness of humanity. You know, through there, we also meet Tess, played by Anna Torv, who, you know, is in a whole situation involving another smuggler and trying to get a battery in order to get the truck to get out of town to get to Tommy. So they're setting that whole up for getting out of there. And then when we do finally meet Ellie, a lot of people were criticizing Bella Ramsey as taking on the role of Ellie. And I'll say this at first as well. Like, I know her as Lady Marmont from Game of Thrones, and she was excellent in Game of Thrones. But this is a whole other beast. You know, can she play an American teenager who has a very large potty mouth? Yes. She has the personification of Ellie down to a T. No question about it in my mind whatsoever. She has got that shit on lock. Perfect casting on that particular front. And when they finally bring in Merle Dainridge, I think that's her name, Marlene, who actually is Marlene in the game too, which is awesome. They start setting that whole thing up with the Fireflies, realizing that they're losing the battle in the quarantine zone in Boston, that they've got to flee, but they've got the situation with Ellie, that they've got to make sure she gets there. Obviously, if you don't know at this particular point in time what's going on, you will in a few minutes, because even though they change it around from where it was in the game to where kind of, you know, Joel and Tess kind of walk in on the situation versus fight their way there, so to speak, it worked out well for the situation. Like Marlene's like, look, I know what you want to do. I know you want to go find your brother. You get her to where I need to get her to, and I'll give you everything you need because she's more important than that. And that sets up the whole thing of them going out there. And of course, them kind of going underneath the bridge outside and them trying to skate past everybody that was from the game as well. Running into the guard that Joel was dealing with drugs to was pretty interesting. And of course, the whole reveal of her being infected but not turning was handled really well here. I was really, really, really impressed with how they did that because like it actually was like, okay, this is something that like there's weight now. We know what they'll do to a kid. You know, if you show them euthanizing a child in your show, you know it's going to get crazy. They mention that there's slavers out there, which we know, like, you know, that's not something necessarily touched upon in the game. We know about the raiders, don't know much about the slavers, definitely know a bit about the cannibals. David, I wonder if Nolan North is going to play him in this season. That would be really cool in my opinion. But still, the whole thing is nuts. And then from there, they start making their way into Boston, trying to get to the State House, and it ends with just a shot tracking up and seeing the two skyscrapers over on one another. And I love that part of the first game. So I was like, yes, that's where we're going to meet the clickers. Oh, that's going to be so sweet. And then I even looked, they had a nice little summary for what to come. They released that today, actually, a nice little like 1 minute, 20-second teaser for what's going to be coming down for the rest of the season. And yeah, it is really in line with the rest of the game. I mean, like as far as video game adaptations go, oftentimes the adaptation takes more of a prevalent place than maybe even like the story does in some aspects. Halo, the TV show, comes to mind. This is different. I mean, not only is there like an absolute care for detail, there are parts from the game that are like whole cloth taken, lines of dialogue that are whole cloth taken and adapted in a way that is just beautiful to watch. I mean, this is art. And that's only the first taste of what's to come. You know what I mean? Like, holy crap. Now, my question is, and this is just for people who've played the games, do you think the end of this season is going to end where the game ends, or are they going to find a way to stretch it a couple seasons? Because remember, the game starts with like fall. I think it's like summer, fall, winter, spring, right? Or like maybe it's fall, winter, spring, whatever. There's different segments of the game take place during different seasons of the year. Is that how this is going to play out? Are they going to do the first season of the show is in like the fall and then go from there? I think with the popularity of the show, they might actually do that. But are they also going to end it when we finally get to Utah at the end of the game? Are they going to show what is the catalyst for what happens in The Last of Us Part 2? I believe so. I think they're going to show it. They're going to hint at it for if you played the games, you know what's coming. But if you haven't played the games, you don't know. And that might make it all the crazier when they do get to that point. It's a question. I don't know what's going to happen with that yet, but I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts about this one. The Last of Us, Season 1, Episode 1. Holy crap. Mwah. I want to go watch it again. What about you guys? Let me know. I'll talk to you all later. Have a good one. Let me know your thoughts below, and peace out.